Okay, today let's talk about 40 acres and a mule. This is in reference to the promises that were made to African Americans, to people who were not African Americans totally, but the people who were freed under slavery. There were some free African Americans already there, so this promise really didn't include them. But the people that were slaves, what skills did they have? Could they write books? Can they be doctors? They were purposely left in the dark about certain skills, and basically most of them, all they knew how to do was to work a farm. So one of the solutions was to promise them 40 acres and a mule, enough land and supplies to farm by yourself. Having a farm was a symbol of freedom. I mean, it was a vehicle for freedom because nobody could tell you what to do or how to act. You were independent. You could support yourself in many ways, not just economically, but you could feed your family by growing stuff on your land. And so you didn't have to rely on anybody else. So this was a very important thing for freedom. So this was the promise that was made to these former slaves, and for 12 years, Reconstruction went on, and these promises, some of them were made, some of them were kept, and one of the institutions that tried to keep those promises was the Freedmen's Bureau. This was a government agency set up by the federal government, by the northern government, to go down to the South and try to look after freed slaves, help them build churches, schools, even colleges, and things are looking pretty good for the former slaves. So let's take a closer look at the Freedmen's Bureau, a little bit closer. Emergency supplies. They watch as former slaves and white planters figure out new working arrangements, basically tried to get everybody to accept the new order of things where slavery is not going to exist anymore, and we've got to figure things out. Southerners did not like this, of course. I mean, anytime somebody who is not from your area comes in and starts telling you what to do, you're going to take offense to it, whether they're right or wrong. It doesn't matter. It's just human nature. And so the people that came from the north were called carpetbaggers because they had these things right here, not even a suitcase, just barely enough to get by. They would come down. Obviously, they were not there to stay in the community and try to build it for so that they can live there as well. They were just going to come down, tell everybody what to do, and then leave. And so this got a lot of resentment from Southerners, whether they agreed with the policies or not. And then people that in the South that said, okay, let's try to make this work. They were called scallywags, and that means traitor to their race. So you could see race here is very much at the core of what's going on here. That it wasn't just about what happened with slavery, but it became, if it wasn't already, racial. All right, so before we move on any further, let's do our vocabulary for today. We've got Reconstruction. The years between 1865 and 1877 is when we tried to rebuild the country after the Civil War. Then we have sharecropper, farmer who pays for using a piece of land with a portion of crop grown on that land. So it's kind of like paying rent, that it's not really your land. This is something that they've done in Europe for a very long time, where you have these wealthy landowners, these dukes, people of renown. They own all this land. They are in control of the land. And then people come, people that can actually farm, people have the skill to do so. They come on, they rent the land, and then they sell their crops and pay off the rent. And so sharecropper is similar to that they would use their crop as land or as rent. And then carpetbagger, we just talked about, a person from the north who went to the south to help the newly freed slaves. Carpetbaggers got their name from large suitcase-like bags made from carpet scraps that many carried filled with their possessions. All right, so let's continue here. Your land, my land, your land. So basically what happened is that all these people that were now free, they were told, we're going to get you 40 acres, farm tools, and a mule to help you farm the land. And then just go do the best you can. You're on your own. But if you remember that in yesterday's lesson, Andrew Johnson decided to forgive Confederate leaders and give them back their properties. So not only did they get power, political power back, and they didn't have to worry about being tried as a traitor, but now what happened to the property that was taken away from them that was now given to the former slaves as a promise, 40 acres and a mule? Now you've got two people that say, this is my land. And the newcomer is always going to have trouble, where if somebody owned land for 5 generations and then somebody came in and owned land for just a couple of weeks, especially when the ruling order is now back in power, they're going to favor themselves. And so they would give back their land. But as a compromise, they said, you know what, we're not going to kick you off the land. We're not evil people or anything like that. We just want our land back, and we just want to benefit from our land. And so what we'll do is you can stay on the farm, you can work on the farm, but then you got to give some of that crop to us, like a rent. And that's where we get the sharecroppers, where people are basically renting the land in order to farm it. It's not theirs. And so they could be threatened or kicked off the land at any point by the plantation owner. And so it's not quite, they're definitely not slaves, but it's not quite free. They didn't get the type of freedom that they were promised. And so this was a major setback for freed slaves. Then we get to equal under the law. Here's where everybody's trying to get back together. Imagine your family's broken up, your family's sold off to, your family's a slave family, and so your sister gets sold off to Alabama, and your brother gets sold off here, your father, everybody's broken up. And so all these former slaves, they're going around the country looking for their lost family members. And some of those stories were good, some of them were not. They didn't always end up as a happy ending. But some people did get reunited with their families, so that was a good thing. Then in 1866, we have the Civil Rights Act of 1866. This is right after Civil. 1 year later, the Republicans are hard at work. They want to make sure that first of all, slavery is gone for good. Secondly, that the new order of how things are going to be run in America takes place. The Supreme Court, remember the Dred Scott, where they said even if he's in the North, he's still a slave. And so they had to reverse that, and the Civil Rights Act does that. It gets rid of these loopholes that they were using in the courts to get around the slavery, anti-slavery laws. So the black codes were being put into place by the South, and so the Civil Rights Act was also there to make sure that they can't mistreat black people and take away the rights that that the Civil War was supposed to have solidified. And so with this Civil Rights Act, they authorized the use of federal troops, of course, with Northern soldiers to enforce it. So when you got soldiers going in there into the South, they're going to make sure that no shenanigans are going on in the South. But how long can you sustain that? I mean, can you leave troops in America forever? So, Southerners, that probably would not have been necessary if Southerners did not put in these black codes and just tried to make things a little bit better. But you got to understand their feelings about how, defeated nation, they're not going to want to cooperate. All right, so this legislation also promised newly freed slaves that their days of bondage were over. There were a lot of slaves that thought, we might have to go back into slavery. Who knows what, things change on a dime. We had a president that was against slavery, and then he was assassinated, and We don't know what's going to happen. And so, the idea of owning their own homes or farms or businesses, with those troops down there, with the laws being passed in Congress, it looked like it could possibly happen.